By the way, we're always looking for new pieces of memorabilia displayed in the Hall of Fame. And Roger, you and I need to talk about the first baseball game in South Dakota. We don't have that up. We got to find a display to get that up in South Dakota. So remember that. Okay, we're still looking. All right. Anyway, my family and I lived across the street from the ballpark. Visitors called it Memorial Park, but if you were a local from Lake Norden, you called it a ball diamond. About a mile outside of town, we had 70 head of cows. On summer nights, my brother Rusty and I, and my dad, timed our fixing fence time with the Twins radio broadcasts. We parked the car in the ditch, we opened the windows, and we turned on the play-by-play. And when we were done with the electric fence, we tested by letting the car fender touch the wire. If it was working, we could hear the buzz over Herb Carneal's magical voice. And I think that was a classical scene related to South Dakota sports fans. I've had a lifelong climb as a baseball reporter. As a kid, I worked in baseball for the Lake Norden Lakers. I had a routine on summer Sundays. I was up early to drag the dirt and mow the grass on the baseball field. Then I'd go to church, of course, eat roast beef in the cafe, and then late Sunday afternoons, I'd mark the foul lines for the big Sunday night game. During the game, I was the public address announcer. We called it loudspeaking back then. And I kept the scorebook. The next morning, I called 3 newspapers with the game results: the Watertown Public Opinion, the Sioux Falls Argus-Leader, and the Huron Daily Plainsman. I used to wait for those afternoon papers to be delivered. Excuse me. You're going to have to wait for the story. I used to wait for those afternoon papers to be delivered to our house so that I could open the paper and see in print the stories that I had reported earlier in the morning. It was an exciting moment. And I guess that thrill of seeing your work in print has never left me. I still feel that same jolt of energy when I see my column on SI.com, or when I have a baseball discussion on Sirius XM radio. I'm reminded of scenes from South Dakota's baseball in many days on my job. I've covered hundreds of games at Yankee Stadium, and I'm always amazed when young opposing players who have never seen a stadium, let alone Derek Jeter, come in for the first time, and they're in awe of the history of Yankee Stadium. When you ask them about Mariano Rivera and Derek Jeter, they don't even know what to say. They have to keep telling themselves, it is just a game, it is just a game. Well, whenever I talk to those athletes about that in Yankee Stadium, I can't help thinking about the 1975 state tournament in Madison. I was playing left field for the Lake Norden Lakers, and there was about 2,000 people at the game, and it was my turn to bat. And all the way up to the dugout, all the way up to the batter's box, I kept saying, it's just a game, it's just a game. But my knees were so shaking, I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. And it made matters worse, because when I stood up at the batter's box, I could hear Danny Olson up in the press box, broadcasting the game, the play-by-play, and he'd say, Antonen, the left-handed hitter, steps in, he digs in, you know, takes ball 1, takes strike 2, and I was so nervous, but I hit a double. And I was pretty excited, but I'll never forget that, almost like how opposing players go to Yankee Stadium and get a hit. And I can also remember what it was like to play the next state tournament game against Canova and Dave Gassman, the legendary hero, probably one of the top 5 pitchers in all of South Dakota baseball history. We went up against him, and we were nervous that day as well. By the way, Dave Gassman struck me out 3 times, probably on 9 pitches. I think baseball fans in South Dakota have taught me the value of community. I'm amazed at how hard people work. The umpires who work for $25 a game to make the game go. The teams that drive 120 or 130 miles one way to make it go. The never-ending volunteer labor, whether it's the people who are running the concession stand or cleaning up the park the next day. They taught me a lesson about the value of community, about the value of sticking together. One of my favorite images of a baseball player in South Dakota is the guy who pulls up his tractor with his plow on the back. And he gets off the tractor, and he changes into his uniform, and then he gets to the dugout or to the bench, and he opens up his work boots, and all the dirts fall out, and then he puts on his baseball shoes. The list of heroes go on and on. How could I not be influenced by Red Lecker of the Yankton Lakers in 1969? He was injured by sniper fire in the Vietnam War, and doctors told him he'd never walk again. Well, I remember the emotion of Lecker winning the state batting title and the state tournament MVP in 1969. And I remember he almost started to cry when Lee Berkman of the State Baseball Commission said, "Red, we're very proud of you. You have come a long, long way." You know, the Yankees' Don Larson threw the only World Series perfect game in 1956. And for so long, Faulkton's Claude Oakes is the only pitcher to do it in South Dakota State Tournament history. And how about Bill Prunty's home run that gave Claremont a 5-4 win over Aberdeen Preds in the 1938 state championship game? It's been billed by many journalists back then as the home run in the dark because it was in the 10th inning, and little Claremont was playing big-time Aberdeen for the state championship. But the game was going into extra innings, and Claremont didn't have any more pitchers. The umpire told both teams that we're going to play one more inning, and then if this game is still tied, we're going to come back the next day and play. That made the Aberdeen team incredibly happy because they had all kinds of pitchers lined up. Claremont's one and only pitcher, Clayton Feaser, had already thrown 10 or 11 innings that day. He would not have been able to pitch. So what happened? In the 10th inning, Bill Prunty hits a home run. Claremont wins the state tournament, saves the rotation. We could go on and on with all these baseball stories. As a kid, I went to state tournaments in places like Parkston, Renner, Redfield, and Freeman. At the state tournament, I used to watch the games, but I used to stand outside the press box too and watch the reporters. I watched Dean Minder of the Mitchell Daily Republic, Bruce Conley and John Egan of the Argus Leader, and Ron Lenz of the Watertown Public Opinion. I watched Danny Olson of Sioux Falls, KSOO Radio, and Hod Nielsen of Yankton broadcasting the game live in the press box. And then I'd go out and sit in the parking lot and listen to them broadcast the game in my dad's car radio. The magic of sports reporting and reliving the game and making it a part of history has never left me. Everything I have accomplished in my career, I owe to growing up on town team baseball in South Dakota. For almost 30 years, I've gotten to live an incredible dream. Some days I think my mom is going to wake me up and say, "Mel, it's time to go back to school." But I've gotten front row seats for baseball history, good and bad. I once interviewed Babe Ruth's sister. I once interviewed the man who was on third base the day Babe Ruth hit his 60th home run. I've seen every World Series game since 1980. I followed Mark McGwire in his historic 1998 season, and I followed him to the halls of Congress where he testified about steroids. I saw how baseball's resiliency lifted up New York after 9/11. I saw what baseball meant to the earthquake victims of San Francisco in 1989. There's 21 or 22 players in baseball history that got 3,000 hits. I've seen 9 of those players get those hits. I've seen Mickey Carroll and talked baseball with Mickey Carroll. Do you know who Mickey Carroll is? Oh, Nancy, the Wizard of Oz. He was one of the 2 living munchkins a few years ago. Oh. Well, you wouldn't know that, but I mean, Mickey Carroll was one of the 2 living munchkins who grew up in St. Louis going to Sportsman's Park. And he loved the Cardinals. And so every spring, we'd sit down and we'd talk baseball, Cardinals baseball. And it was just one of those out-of-body experiences. But really, the most gripping story, really, was my relationship with Bob Feller, the greatest right-hand pitcher of all time. was a Hall of Fame player. He was a World War II hero. He played big league baseball. He won some games and then went back to graduate from high school in Van Meter, Iowa. He was on the cover of Time and Newsweek in the 1930s. He was a classic American icon. Whenever I'd go to Cleveland to cover a game, he'd sit by me in the press box and read all the newspapers. He loved reading the New York Times. And then he would sign autographs for all the people who wrote in and asked him. He'd always say, I am the one athlete to sign the most autographs in the entire world. He said, I've signed more autographs than anybody in the whole world. We'd sit down and we'd eat dinner before the game. And he'd tell me stories about Lou Gehrig, pitching to Lou Gehrig, and being friends with Cy Young, and what it was like to know Babe Ruth. But then we used to go to his farm outside of Cleveland. And that's when it really got sappy. He planted hollyhocks in his yard on his farm in Cleveland because that's what his dad planted in Van Meter, Iowa on the farm. He bought a replica of the tractor and keeps it on his farm. The replica of the tractor that his dad used to plow his first baseball field in Van Meter, Iowa. At age 90, he used to take a rubber ball from behind the barn, behind the switch in the barn, and he used to stand out in the driveway and he would throw rubber balls against the wall at age 90. And I'd be standing out there some mornings and going, I cannot believe that I'm watching Bob Feller do this. But most of all, he was always tied to Van Meter, Iowa, and his farm there. He pointed to a thermometer that he had nailed up on his house, and it was from the elevator in Van Meter, Iowa. And he said, I keep that there because I always want to know that you never ever want to forget about going home. And in closing, I'd say, Bob, I feel the same way.